Welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson, in for Pat Doris this week. Yesterday, we shared with you how ambulance provider AMR believes its slow response times in Multnomah County are a crisis bordering on a catastrophe. AMR also provides EMS services in Washington County, Clark County, and Clackamas County. We've told you how issues with emergency response are widespread, thanks in part to a shortage of paramedics. But in the EMS ecosystem, there's one element that's often overlooked: fire crews. And one fire chief has had enough when it comes to picking up AMR's slack. That's tonight's big story. The role of fire departments during an emergency call is to get there quickly and stabilize the patient. It's AMR's job to transport. But when ambulances take far too long to get there, firefighters have had to make choices on whether or not they bring patients to the hospital. And that's a last resort. But there's been a growing expectation and reliance on fire crews to fill in the gaps, as AMR response times have fallen off around the greater Portland area. I talked with Jim Geering, fire chief for the cities of Forest Grove and Cornelius. Starting tomorrow, he's drawing a line. His firefighters will no longer transport patients to compensate for AMR, only transporting when they believe it's necessary.
In actuality, AMR is struggling to provide staffing on a day-to-day basis, 7/24, on their ambulances. And there's a trickle-down effect that departments like ours are feeling.
Forest Grove and Cornelius Fire Chief Jim Geering says he's had enough. His firefighters are transporting patients to hospitals just about daily, as AMR ambulance crews are either understaffed or unavailable. Fire department ambulances are supposed to just be used for quick response and initial treatment.
And when we take our staff and we take our units and place them on an ambulance and send our ambulance to do a transport to a hospital that's out of the city or out of the area, it diminishes our capability to respond to emergencies right here in our own city.
Starting December 1st, the Forest Grove and Cornelius fire departments will be calling their own shots. They're removing their ambulance transports from available status in the 911 system. Chief Geering emailed AMR's Vice President of Operations, Randy Lauer, explaining his decision. The operational impacts of continuing to utilize our publicly funded fire department transport units to subsidize a private business has become unsustainable, he wrote. While this is less than ideal, we feel that we have no other choice. KGW asked Lauer about the frustration of fire departments.
They want to get out of the ambulance transport line of work. And that's one of our goals, too, is to get our staffing up in Washington County so that we can respond to all the calls and relieve the fire department of what they necessarily had to do with a transport role coming out of the pandemic.
AMR took over ambulance services in Washington County in August.
But we're on a very good trajectory in Washington County in terms of staffing, and response times are improving week by week. The incidence of level 0, where we have no ambulance to respond, are reducing dramatically. So Washington County is definitely on the right path.
Geering does say the situation has improved slightly since AMR took charge, but fire crews still need AMR to meet its responsibilities.
And what that looks like is full staffing across the board, improved service, lower response times, and great service to the public.
When there's a critical, life-threatening emergency, Forest Grove and Cornelius crews may still use their ambulance for transport instead of just initial treatment, but Geering said his crews will make that decision themselves, not because they have to routinely fill in the gaps.
Until we can see some really significant progress, we need to take some actions to ensure that we maintain the service and continuity right here in Forest Grove.
For smaller fire departments like Forest Grove, taking an ambulance on a transport can reduce the staff down from 4 firefighters to 2, which Geering told me is just unacceptable. On that email to AMR, he copied all of the other fire departments in the region. I asked him if he could see others following his lead here. He says he believes other departments are going to make some changes. We'll see. What do you think about this? Is this a step you think fire departments should be taking, or keeping things the way that they are now? You know the drill. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Well, let's stay on the ambulance response issue and share some of your thoughts on my story from last night. It was the first time after many of my requests that AMR sat down with me to talk about slow response times in Multnomah County. The biggest issue from their perspective is Multnomah County's 2 paramedic requirement for each ambulance. The company tells me they operate in more than 250 different communities around the country, and Multnomah County is the only one that has that requirement. They believe that if they could use a 1 paramedic, 1 EMT model, their lagging response times would improve. The majority of your comments agreed, saying Multnomah County should drop that mandate even if it's temporary.
After watching your story on AMR and the 2 paramedic system, I don't understand why Multnomah County does not drop this for a short time period that AMR is proposing and let that 2 paramedic system come back to life, period. Multnomah County is being ignorant in the fact, and Dr. Jude needs to get off his horse and allow this to happen before the catastrophe really hits the county.
Some of you take it even a step further and say the change to 1 paramedic, 1 EMT model should be permanent.
I think it's ridiculous that Multnomah County thinks we're so special that we need to have 2 paramedics. If it is true that 2 paramedics make a better cardiac arrest, what about nobody there on that cardiac arrest? Has that doctor ever taken that into account? So I think Multnomah County needs to get off their high horse and fall in line and do 1 EMT with a paramedic, not just for 18 months or 2 years, but permanently.
Kate wrote to us, the stalemate between AMR and the county is ridiculous. It's going to take a tragedy like one of the county commissioners needing an ambulance for herself that takes 20 minutes to arrive before they truly realize how desperate the situation is. Or AMR gets sued because an ambulance did not arrive and someone died as a direct result. I often feel like I'm living in a third world country and not Portland, Oregon.
I strongly urge Multnomah County readjust their demand and go to 1-and-1 on the ambulances so they can get enough people, or at least to start to get enough people to get to these calls. If you've got 1 paramedic and 1 EMT, that's fine by me. I'd rather have that than no one show up until it's too late.
And how about this from Jack? I speak from the perspective of having been a career paramedic and firefighter in Oregon for 29 years. I'm a very strong believer that it is in the best interest of the patient that an ambulance staffed with 1 paramedic and 1 EMT arriving sooner is better than a 2 medic ambulance arriving later. But while Jack feels the 1-on-1 model is the way to go, we heard from another former paramedic who disagrees. Kel says, as a former AMR paramedic who worked in Multnomah County, 2 paramedics were run ragged on most calls. It changes to only 1 paramedic. That paramedic would be burned out so fast because they will run the majority of calls. It's unfair to the 1 paramedic to take the brunt of the work with little breaks, but a 1 paramedic, 1 basic ambulance is not the answer.
I'm just wondering why we're even having this debate. AMR signed a contract, and the contract called for 2 of the more medically trained people to be on each ambulance. If they can't fulfill the contract, then let's contract with somebody who can. This is ridiculous that we should lower our standards because they can't follow through on their contract.
And that is an interesting thought, but the sentiment I hear from most people is, well, good luck finding another company that can. AMR has a bit of a monopoly on ambulance service in the greater Portland area right now after taking over from Metro West in Washington County. AMR has been the company in charge of Multnomah County for decades. They're well connected and ingrained. It's not easy to find a replacement, even harder to rip up a contract, and there's no assurance that another company would produce better results. Thanks, as always, for your thoughts. And now to a quick update on a story we brought you yesterday out of Multnomah County, where a truck belonging to an organizer with the Oregon Rural Action Group caught on fire outside of a Boardman home that had just an hour before been visited by 3 state legislators. The lawmakers were invited by Oregon Rural Action to learn more about the groundwater contamination crisis that our Pat Doris showed you earlier this month in his Tainted Water series. This morning, the Morrow County Sheriff's Office confirmed to us that there is an open investigation into the fire. Last night when we told you about this, we didn't know if deputies were looking into what started the blaze. The Boardman fire chief confirmed the fire is, quote, suspicious, but the fire district closed their own investigation without nailing down a cause, therefore leaving it, quote, undetermined. The executive director of Oregon Rural Action, Kristen Ostrom, says authorities told her turpentine, a flammable liquid, was found at the scene. We'll be sure to update you when the sheriff's office closes its own investigation. And up next on the story, it's a success story with a twist. Our Environment Northwest team shows us an example of infrastructure that's meant to help salmon runs on the Baker River in the state of Washington. It's working incredibly well in one area, but not so much downriver, and there's a big reason why. We'll explain when the story returns. Tonight, our Environment Northwest team is focused on the state of Washington, the Baker River in Skagit County to be exact. There's a historic milestone there for Native American tribes when it comes to salmon runs, which in the not so distant past were nearly wiped out. 2 dams on the river played a major part in all of that, but efforts from an entity that might surprise you have helped the fish come back in record numbers. Susanna Frame with our sister station King 5 in Seattle has the story.
It's this kind of work at the Baker Fish Hatchery that's partly to credit for saving Baker River sockeye salmon from extinction. 2 hydroelectric dams operated by Puget Sound Energy, or PSC, churn out electricity for about 1 million customers in Washington state. But for 85 years, the dams also blocked miles of habitat for salmon and nearly destroyed the runs. In a stunning feat, this year, the fish came roaring back with a record return that smashed the forecasted numbers.
It was amazing again to see these large numbers. It's one of the biggest things that have happened to our people.
This summer, as the historic run came through their ancestral grounds, members of the Upper Skagit Indian tribe got to extend their number of allotted fishing days. A far cry from the years the tribe couldn't fish for Baker River sockeye whatsoever. That went on for 8 decades.
It was a real positive thing for us to see this big run this year and a big milestone for our people. I never thought that I would make it to the day to see that.
In 1925, PSC built its first dam on the Baker and tried to make up for the harm to salmon. They built a fish ladder and in later years tried other ideas. It wasn't working. From the 1920s to the 80s, the run struggled with low numbers, with an all-time low in 1985 of just 99 fish. The dams were partly to blame for crushing the salmon runs, and with it, the heart and soul of the Upper Skagit Indian tribe who'd fished the river for 10,000 years. A way of life was on the brink.
Part of us would have been gone, a part of our history, part of our culture. That's why we continue to be proactive and speak for the salmon. The salmon must survive just as we've survived.
It was very concerning.
PSC officials knew the clock was ticking.
We thought we were going to lose this stock entirely, and we were close.
The utility worked with tribes and the state, and in 2010 installed one of the most sophisticated fish passage operations in the country. A system to move fish around the dams by trapping them, then literally taxiing them around the dams and shooting them back into the water on the other side. PSC also built the Baker Hatchery. Right now, once a week, they're separating adult males from females at the end of their lives. From the females, they're removing about 2,700 eggs apiece, then fertilizing them before putting them in incubation trays. After a few months, this whole process will result in tiny fish being put into Baker Lake. And in 4 years, they should return as adults. Another way to bolster the run, a multi-million-dollar year-round investment by a utility.
It aligns with our values, and this has been the right thing from the get-go.
And here's the payoff. From that dismal low of 99 fish, the run has drastically improved. This year's run was expected to be around 31,000 sockeye, but the actual number more than doubled at 65,000.
It's a labor of love to see all these fish come back. Where it was to where we are now, it's remarkable. You don't get success stories like this, but this is one of them.
About 200 yards from this spot on the Baker, the river flows into the Skagit, where another utility, Seattle City Light, operates 3 hydroelectric dams with no fish passage system installed at all. And for 4 years, that's been a contentious sticking point between City Light, Native American tribes, and government agencies. Unlike Puget Sound Energy, that accepted responsibility for harming fish, Seattle's public utility fought that notion.
But tribal leaders say Seattle continues to ignore them.
In a 2-year investigation, the King 5 investigators exposed how Seattle City Light denied their dams hurt fish and originally refused to even study the idea of adding fish passage. The only scientists who believed that theory worked for Seattle City Light.
We flipped the switch. I asked the team to flip the switch.
In April, the then CEO of the utility announced the city had finally agreed to install fish passage on the Skagit.
I think it's a big step. It's intended to be one. This is what we need to do.
That was 6 months ago, and to date, there's still no agreement signed, no official commitment by City Light.
We're just hoping that the city follows through with its commitment to do what it stated it was going to do. I want to make it clear the Upper Skagit tribe needs to have fish passage over these 3 dams to make this right.
While salmon runs on the Skagit have dwindled over the years, what's happened on the Baker is giving the tribe hope.
This is a victory, and it just shows that through a collective effort and collaboration, things can be positive and you can affect a change in the right direction.
Seattle City Light, the utility with no fish passage around their dams on the Skagit River, sent me a statement to say yes, they are, quote, still committed to putting in fish passage around the dams. But they say it is ultimately up to the federal government to sign off on that plan, and that could take 2 to 3 years. Stakeholders on the Skagit, including Native American tribes, tell me they hope the salmon have that long.
Still to come on this story, when you think Pacific Northwest Lake's Boo Boo Lake may not be the first one that comes to mind, but might have even not heard of it. It has quite the history, and we'll even explain how it got its unique name. That's next when the story returns. Well, the KGW Great Toy Drive continues tonight, and this week is an amazing time to give because local Toyota dealers are matching all donations up to $15,000. You give 20 bucks, they give 20 bucks. It's that easy, it's that simple. Head to kgw.com/toy and click Donate Cash. If you'd like to drop off an unwrapped toy in person and maybe meet some of us, the KGW team, we have 2 collection events this weekend. The first is Saturday at the Hollywood Fred Meyer, or donate a toy at the Portland Brewfest and receive an extra drink ticket. We'll have people there on both Saturday and Sunday. There's a relatively shallow lake in the High Cascades with quite the name, Boo Boo Lake, and it's a paradise for trout. So how did Boo Boo enter into this equation? Devin Haskins went fishing for answers in this edition of What's in a Name.
In order to get to Boo Boo Lake, it takes a hike. A steep, mile-plus long hike. The unmaintained trail is a little hard to follow, but it's something my guide, Jeff Ziller, has done before.
How often do you ever get up here to Boo Boo Lake?
I actually get to visit this place about every other year from the air.
So you've only seen it from the ground?
From the ground, though?
Once.
It's a different number.
We'll make it twice.
Now it's going to be twice, if we make it up to the top.
What do you mean, F?
The first half of the climb is a pretty steep one before it finally levels out.
If Boo Boo Lake is on your to-do list to go fish at, just be prepared for about 1,000-foot elevation climb before you get there.
Almost there. All we have to do is hike right up over this little ridge here and we'll be there. There's a lake, I hope, on the other side of it.
Don't worry, we did find it.
Well, there is some green water, and this is always the joy of getting up here and finding a wet spot in the middle of a dry forest. This is Boo Boo Lake.
So what is Boo Boo Lake? Well, it's a small 2-acre lake that at its deepest point is about 18 feet, and it is full of trout.
Oh, that's one of our little cutthroat. This is the last of the Hackleman cutthroat that we have. They're just gorgeous fish, and it is what we call a very productive lake.
It's so productive thanks to an Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife trout stocking program.
On the odd years, we stock somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 or 400 lakes in the Cascades with a helicopter. That's the whole Cascade Range. So I'm Jeff Ziller. I am the district fish biologist for the Upper Willamette District for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Yeah, it's just so quiet. We didn't go that far, and yet we got away from all of the noise.
For more than a century, ODFW has been stocking High Cascade lakes with trout, a tradition that provides additional fishing opportunities for those that hiked up the mountain.
From the air, a lot of these lakes look alike.
In 1963, fish biologists had planned to have a pilot stock another lake just north of here.
The only directions they had were a map and probably an aerial photograph so that they could take a look and say, well, yeah, that must be it.
The next year, the biologists came up to the lake to see if it'd be a good place to stock fish, except they noticed fish already jumping.
And they're going, wait a second, this has not been stocked. And yet when they went out and they sampled it, probably with a rod like this, they found fish that were not native to Oregon in the lake. And so they said, oops, somebody made a boo-boo here and stocked the wrong lake.
And the name stuck. Today, Boo Boo Lake is home to 3 kinds of trout.
At the moment, we still have the Hackleman cutthroat, we have rainbow trout, and we have brook trout in here.
And in the hour we were there
is a fish.
Jeff felt bite.
Beautiful fish.
After bite.
Oop, I got one following it though.
After bite. Devin Haskins, KGW News.
Quite a lot of fish updates in this show tonight. Would you rather be a fish pilot helping to stock the lakes like that, or maybe one of the ones transporting up in the dams up northern areas of Washington? Anyway, that's the end of our show. Just food for thought, and I'm processing here. Thanks for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. Tomorrow on the story, we're taking a closer look at the teacher strike that ended this last week here in Portland. We'll compare what they demanded on day one of the strike to what they ended up getting weeks later. It's something that many of you have talked about and something we wanted to take our time looking into so we could bring you the answers. I hope you'll join me for that tomorrow at 6:30. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.